Welcome to Margin Notes from the Central Church of Christ in Paducah, Kentucky, and welcome to the final video in the series we've been doing on the book of Exodus. If this is your first time watching these videos, just because it's the end of this little series doesn't mean you can't jump in here. But we do encourage you to go back and watch our previous videos, of course, this being the last on Exodus. But prior to this, we did a short video just introducing the Bible, and then also, of course, went through the book of Genesis. And at the conclusion of this video, we will let you know where we are planning on going next. Maybe a little bit of a surprise to you because you think, well, Genesis, Exodus, but we'll have a little surprise for you at the end. Before I dive into this section of Exodus, this final part, let me say this will be a little bit shorter video because, frankly, I don't have as many margin notes in my Bible on this last section. And part of that is because if you've ever read through Exodus and you get to this final section, there's two reasons. One is there's a ton of detail, but also because a lot of what is found, especially in about chapter 35 through about 38 or 39, is basically repeating or expanding on some things that have already been found in Exodus. And so for that reason, I sometimes don't just double up the note or those sorts of things. I do have, and this is not in the notes that I will share with you, some notes in the margin of my Bible where I say, this parallels back to chapter 27, or this section expands on chapter 25, verses 14 through 24, or whatever. I'm making those numbers up, but you get the point. And that might be helpful for you to do as well. And you can find all kinds of commentaries or things online that will list some of those things for you, where this item is placed in the tabernacle, but then it says it was constructed, or the instructions were given back in chapter 25 versus whatever, and that might be helpful for you to have those references back. As I always say at the beginning of these videos, I always encourage you to write these things down first elsewhere, in other words, besides your Bible, a notepad, or write them type them somewhere on your computer and evaluate them, study them, see if they're worthy of including in your study materials. But these are some things that I find helpful. So with all that said, let's dive into just a few notes from these last 7 or 8 chapters of the second book of the Bible, the book of Exodus. Exodus 33. This may be a very odd thing to show here. Between verses 6 and 7 is where this note is going to be found, because you have an issue going on at the end of, in the first part of chapter 33. And the people are supposed to take care of their problems. When the people heard this disastrous word, verse 4, they mourned. No one put on his ornaments, for the Lord had said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments, that I may know what you are to do. Therefore the people of Israel stripped themselves their ornaments from Mount Horeb or Sinai onward. And then you have more work on the tabernacle and such beginning. And so between these verses, I have just this note. We don't have a note about what the actual issue was here, but if you've read through, you know what's going on. And this is the note I have. The construction on the tabernacle and the consecration of the priest was actually put on hold until this issue was resolved. The holiness of the people dealing with their sin took precedence, making sure they were prepared for what was coming. And so in my Bible, I have, this is the Bible I preach from, not the one I write my notes in, but even in this one, between 6 and 7 is actually a little bit of a break there. There's enough place there maybe to write this note. If not, you may have to write it actually out in the margin or elsewhere. But just take note, you got all this stuff going on about the tabernacle and so forth, but it is put on hold until this issue is resolved, dealing with the golden calf and other things coming on following that. The next note comes from that same section, one of the words found in verse 7. We didn't read 7, I'm going to go right through 6. Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting, and everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. So this tent that he called the tent of meeting, the note that I have is this is not the tabernacle. This is likely, I should have likely there, Moses' own dwelling. It is a temporary solution outside the camp. The tabernacle is still being or is about to be, I should say, constructed. It'll begin at the end of chapter 35. God's glory will not overshadow or indwell the tabernacle until the very end of the book of Exodus. But you have this tent here that Moses sets up outside the camp, where the people can come and do all sorts of things, that is a temporary solution until the tabernacle is completed and God's glory dwells there and all the rituals begin, all of that. Again, this is likely Moses' own dwelling, but the key to it is this. Here you have the tent that he called the tent of meeting. And by the way, just as you read and study the Bible in the future, as you read through the Old Testament, phrases like tent of meeting, tabernacle, sometimes are used interchangeably and sometimes aren't, and frankly, it gets really confusing sometimes. But this is a place where we know it wasn't because the tabernacle hadn't been constructed yet. It makes it really easy. But just keep that in mind that here it's almost a precursor of the tabernacle and not the tabernacle itself. Exodus 34 and verse 7. This is when Moses is supposed to make the new Ten Commandments. Not that the commandments were new, but the new stone tablets of them. And let's read verses 6 and 7. The Lord passed before him, Moses, and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generations. You have that little list there, iniquity, transgression, and sin. Now, obviously, these are similar terms, so this is not meant to be some huge, dive down to the Hebrew and get every last little difference in them. But there is a little difference in them, because the key really is the fullness of the list, that anything that's wrong, God is willing to forgive. But here is just a small list of a little bit of difference in those words you may want to have. Iniquity is a general word that just means to turn aside. And it's very similar to transgression, which is a willful violation. But then sin is I guess, I don't know Hebrew at all, so if you do, please correct me if I'm wrong here. I guess you could say it's probably the most generic word or general word, just any moral failure, anything that goes against the law of God. Now again, do those overlap somewhat? Yeah, absolutely, there's no doubt about it. But why does God name all three, iniquity and transgression and sin? Probably just simply to do two things. One is to give these little different shades of meaning between the three, but also to show us the power of that full list. God will forgive anything that is repented of by his people. And so you may want to have that note there to make those small marks of, small distinguishing marks, I should say, between those three things found on that list. Exodus chapter 34 and verse 9. I want to read verses 8 and 9 to get this one. This is after that speech we just read, by the way, from God. Beginning of verse 8, and Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshipped. And he said, if now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us. For it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. Now, on the screen, I have the word our there. It's actually found twice. You can also include the word us, which is also found twice in verse 9. So really, you can make this either connect all four of those words, us, our, us, or choose one of them, or whatever. But here's the note that I have, that this is strong spiritual leadership, because Moses includes himself in the need for God's forgiveness. He does not just say, forgive me, and he certainly does not just say, forgive them. He includes himself among the people who are in need of God's forgiveness and who he wants taken into God's inheritance and all those things found in that verse. But it is a powerful sign of strong spiritual leadership that Moses doesn't just ask for himself, but certainly does not just say, forgive those people over there who've done this terrible stuff. But he includes himself. Which shows a great deal of Moses' heart, and you could probably make a whole sermon out of that concept right there in that one verse, or those two verses, verses 8 and 9. All right, Exodus chapter 34 and verse 21. This is in a section dealing with the Sabbath. 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. And this is the key, the last sentence of that verse. In plowing time and in harvest you shall rest. So you have that concept there of the work week, 6 days and then a day of rest, a day of consecration. But the second line of that verse basically tells us that was always to go on. And the note that I have is there's no break from obeying the Sabbath in the Old Testament, even during, and you can choose a better word than this, perfect times of work. When it's time to plow, when it's time to harvest, they were still supposed to take that Sabbath day. Why? Because it taught them to trust God. I mean, this is the perfect day to harvest the field. Let's get out there and do this, even though it's the Sabbath. No, no. God said, "You obey me, and that's going to take care of itself." Well, I'm going to be busy tomorrow. I need to plow my field up because even though it's the Sabbath. No, God said, "You follow that all the time." Now we don't follow the Sabbath now, but you still have the principle of doing things God's way and trusting Him that everything will be okay, that He will still care for us, take care of us. And again, that word perfect in the note, you can probably choose a better word, just the best one I could think of. And I know what I mean in writing that, so choose your own word that's helpful to you. That's one of those I kind of wrote the way I it registers in my brain, but it may not register in your brain as well, and I fully understand that if you choose a different word to describe that. Exodus 36, and by the way, I didn't choose any notes from 35 because in my margin, it's almost all this is repeated back in from chapter 25 or chapter 27, and all of that. Exodus 36, you have the note there on the screens. Let's read verses 1 and 2. We introduced these guys named Bezalel and Aholiab. We're introduced at the beginning, really, back in chapter 35. But beginning of verse 1, Bezalel and Aholiab, and every craftsman in whom the Lord has put skill and intelligence to know how to do any work in the construction of the sanctuary, shall work in accordance with all that the Lord has commanded. Here's the key verse, verse 2. And Moses called Bezalel and Aholiab, and every craftsman in whose mind the Lord had put skill, everyone whose heart stirred him up to come do the work. They weren't conscripted. This is another contrast between following God and following Pharaoh, now that they're out of Egypt. In contrast with working on Pharaoh's projects, work on, that should say constructing, not contracting, constructing God's tabernacle was voluntary. Although I guess it was contracting in a way. I love when I use a word that's not the right one, so spell check doesn't catch it. In contrast with working on Pharaoh's projects, work on constructing God's tabernacle was voluntary. Now some were brought in, but here they said if their heart stirred up, you bring them in, let them do the work. What a contrast from in Egypt when they were beaten and forced and all these things, just showing how much greater God is than any leader of Egypt, especially, of course, the Pharaoh under whom they had been slaves for so long, just a short time before these events are going on. Exodus 37 and verse 17, a section dealing with making the lampstand. Even though the key is verse 17, I want to read, this is going to be a little bit lengthy, but I want to read verses 17 through 19 because it's going to explain part of this note a little better if I continue to read. And you really should read the whole section. It goes through verse 24. But for time's sake, let's just read verses 17 through 19. He also made the lampstand of pure gold. He made the lampstand of hammered work. Its base, its stem, its cups, its calyxes, and its flowers were of one piece with it. And there were 6 branches going out of its sides, 3 branches of the lampstand out of one side of it, and 3 branches of the lampstand out of the other side of it, 3 cups made like almond blossoms, each with calyx and flowers on one branch, and 3 cups made like all almond blossoms, each with calyx and flower on the other branch. So for the 6 branches going out of the lampstand. Now, there's a lot of detail there. And the reason I want to read all 3 verses is because really this second word that I have in here, flowers, you could also connect to the idea of the almonds and all those things there. The key to this, to me, is everything in the tabernacle was meant to express something about the nature, the holiness of God, or His relationship with His people. And that's no different here. You have a lamp, or light, and flowers. God is light and life. And the reason I wanted to read all the way through verse 19 is because it wasn't just these hammered flowers, these gold flowers, but you have almonds and all sorts of things there. True life comes from God. And so in that one piece of furniture, that lampstand, you have obviously light, but then with the picture of flowers and almonds and all that, you also have that God is life, all pictured in that one piece of furniture. Exodus 38, and you see the note here, and if I turn my Bible to the right page, it would be helpful. I turn 2 pages instead of 1. This is where you get a lot of detail about the tabernacle, and sometimes we get lost in all the, how many curtains there were and how many loops there were and all that kind of stuff. But there's also some symbolic meaning here that's beautiful. beginning in verse 18 of Exodus 38. And the screen for the gate of the court was embroidered, with needlework in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twisted linen. It was 20 cubits long and 5 cubits high in its breadth, corresponding to the hangings of the court. And their pillars were 4 in number. Their 4 bases were of bronze, their hooks of silver, and the overlaying of the capitals and their fillets of silver, and all the pegs for the tabernacle and for the court all around were of bronze. And you go, okay, who cares about all this detail? Whatever we want to think about, it's fine. You can find all kinds of neat articles about the materials and all of that. But here's the key: there was only one door or one gate. That's it. And obviously, there's all kinds of spiritual implication there. And so I have a cross-reference, CF, to John 10:7, where Jesus said, I am the door. Now, he specifically said there, I am the door of the sheep. And so I know this is stretching the picture a bit, because this was the door or the gate to the tabernacle. And there are other things that there are only one of, one way to the Father and all those sorts of things. This is just one that I have marked because you have specifically the word door, where here in Exodus you have gate, obviously the same concept, dealing with how to enter something. There's just one way to heaven. There's just one way into the tabernacle in the Old Testament, and on that would go throughout the Old Testament. Exodus chapters 39 and 40. You will go through these chapters if you want to. You can find the phrase, depending on the translation you have, as the Lord commanded Moses, if I counted correctly, 17 times. I believe it's 10 in chapter 39 and 7 in chapter 40. I forgot to make that note here beside me to have that. But it's something like that. It's not perfectly even. Obviously, 17. It can't be perfect. It's either 9 and 8 or 10 and 7 times that you will find that phrase or something super close to it in these last 2 chapters of Exodus. And almost right smack dab in the middle of the list, you have chapter 40 and verse 5, so he did. However you want to mark that is fine. You might want to highlight, all of the as the Lord commanded Moses in one color, and then as he did so he did in a different color right in the middle. You may want to box them all in and highlight the one in the middle or something. But just seeing these, all of these, the Lord as the Lord commanded Moses, the end of verse 5, the end of verse 1, the end of verse 5, the end of verse 7, and on it goes, all the way through a huge part of chapter 40, but then right in the middle, verse 5, so he did, and I have the wrong verse there. It is not verse 5. It's verse, I don't know why I have verse 5. It's verse 16. I don't know why I have verse 5 there. That may be one of the ones from the previous list. Maybe one of the times the other one is found. But anyway, it is verse 16 where so he did. This Moses did, according to all the commandment of the Lord, so he did. So you have that almost payoff there in the list. You also, by the way, could mark the end of verse 33, so Moses finished the work. But I like this other one, so he did according to the commandments of the Lord. Exodus 40 and verse 2. On the first day of the first month, you shall erect the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. Okay, you have all these time markers in the Old Testament. What does this one mean? This is 1 year after the Exodus. Everything that has occurred, really in Egypt, starting at the beginning of the book of Exodus, but for sure since they were leaving Egypt. This is the culmination of it. The building of the tabernacle, God's glory is going to overshadow the tabernacle at the very end of the book, the end of the chapter. And so this is, you have from basically Exodus 12, when they come out of Egypt, to now, you have a year where they've been at Sinai, receiving the law and doing all these other things. And now the tabernacle is constructed, it's being erected, and God's glory is going to overshadow it. So that time marker really is significant because it's 1 year after coming out of Egypt. The final note is found near the end of the book. Let's read verses 34 and 35. When the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle, and Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Now that gives one reason why Moses couldn't enter. God's glory was there. But also, no sacrifices had been made in the tabernacle yet. It wasn't cleansed. That verse really leads to the need, or sets the scene for, the book of Leviticus. Why you have all of these offerings and sacrifices and priests and all that stuff. Nobody can enter the tabernacle until those things were in order and going, and even Moses himself. could not enter the tabernacle at this point because we need Leviticus to help us know how to enter in the Old Testament the place where God's glory dwelt. And so that verse is kind of the one that leads forward. I read one commentator. In fact, I have a note at the very end of the book of Exodus, and I'm not. This is not the Bible I have my notes in, the one that I do these videos from. That's why sometimes I'm looking, why can't I see that? Because I'm using a different Bible. It's easier to lay flat for these videos. But anyway, but he said something like, at the end of Exodus, so closes not a book, but a chapter. And I kind of like that because Leviticus will be kind of the next chapter in that story. So there's all the margin notes on Exodus. We hope we hope these have encouraged you. I believe it's been 8 videos long that we've gone through this 40 chapter book. We hope these have encouraged you along the way. So that gets us through a video about the table of contents of your Bible. It gets us through a bunch of videos on the first book of the Bible, Genesis, and now it gets us through the second book of the Bible, Exodus. In 2 weeks, Lord willing, there will be another video on Exodus, sort of. If you remember, when we finished Genesis, we released a video that just contains all the slides. You don't have to look at me. It just goes through the slides one after the other, about 100 and you're going to see it come up here, I believe, if I do this correctly. Yeah, 176 slides on Exodus. And it just scrolls through them. So maybe you missed one here or there, or you just want to share just those and just pause it every so often or just be reminded of things. And frankly, it buys me a little bit of time to get a little bit further ahead on these videos. Following that, we are going to take a little break from these longer books and from the Old Testament, and we're going to do a 1 video shot at the very brief New Testament book of Philemon. And so that video will be released, Lord willing, on November the 11th of 2021, and that will be the only video in November. With Thanksgiving and other things being at the end of the month, we release on Thursdays. The next video would have been released on Thanksgiving Day. That's probably not the best time to release one of these. So Philemon will cover the month of November. And then we will come back and begin a series on the book of Leviticus that will be 3 videos long. And that should close out 2021. And if all goes well, that means we'll have covered 4 books of the Bible in 2021, and I'm already making plans for 2022. But we hope these have encouraged you. Again, 2 weeks from today, Lord willing, if you watch these when they're being released, just a video with the slides for Exodus on it. Then 2 weeks beyond that, for the month of November the 11th, will be a video on the short book of Philemon, and then we will dive into Leviticus for the month of December. We hope these videos encourage you to study God's Word, and if you would, please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, or both. It's released on both, but please tell others about this. This takes quite a bit of work. We enjoy doing them, but the more people we know that we're touching with these, the more encouragement it is to us, and we hope these encourage you in your Bible study. And as always, we hope these videos help to encourage you to read the Word, study the Word, and live the Word. Thanks for watching.